to the expansion of human consciousness. His longtime interest in plant hallucinogens, drug experiences generally, and the conscious development of conscious alternatives led him into the investigation of the phenomenology of religious experience worldwide, but particularly that of primitive people against a background of nature. His interest led him on a journey to the Amazon basin, where he discovered a way in which these states became available to himself directly. Terence Mckenna, I wonder if you could share with us that experience that shaped your life and work since that time.
Certainly. There have actually been a number of expeditions to the Amazon that I have participated in. The earliest in 1971, the most recent in 1981. In 1981, a joint ethnobotanical expedition composed of people from Harvard and the University of British Columbia went down to Iquitos in the far east of Peru, and my brother was part of that expedition. He is an ethnochemist at the University of British Columbia. We were looking at ayahuasca, which is a hallucinogenic beverage taken over a very wide area in the lowland jungles of Ecuador, Colombia, and Peru. And we were also looking at a very little studied hallucinogen called ukuhe, or curacao, which is used by the Witoto, Bora, and Muinani people. And in both cases, these hallucinogenic drugs are based on DMT or DMT in combination with some other chemical which potentiates the experience. These are probably the two least studied of the hallucinogens, although ayahuasca is a major folk religion over a very large area and is involved in shamanic curing and is very familiar to the poor classes of the lowland jungles of Peru, and is well known among the mestizo populations. The curacao is a much less known drug, and we were studying it because the orthodox pharmacological theories say that it should not be orally active, and yet it is. So there was a scientific problem there to deal with.
Something of discovering a new reality for science.
Well, you have to have a scientific problem to center these expeditions, and then what you actually brush up against, of course, is the phenomenology of the drug as it's experienced, and this is far removed from the pharmacological issues which are being sorted out now in the laboratory. But the experience of taking these drugs in the Amazon, up these small tributaries that run into the main body of the river, among pre-literate people who are definitely not middle class, and in the ambiance of the equatorial continental jungles, is very interesting, very enlightening.
How did you respond to that? I assume that you'd experimented with other hallucinogens in the recent past before you made that journey, and that indeed you were looking for the effect that would have a psychophysical response in you. And yet, apparently, you came upon something quite unexpected.
Yes, well, since the middle 60s, we had been interested in dimethyltryptamine, DMT, both because of the intensity of the experience and also because of the rapidity of its onset. When DMT is smoked, it comes on in about 15 to 30 seconds, and the onset of the effects of that rapidity actually challenges science to explain it. And then the content of the experience seemed to us to go beyond even the orthodox model of what the psychedelic experience should constitute. In other words, the psychedelic experience has been discussed in terms of consciousness expansion or exploring the contents of the personal or the collective unconscious, or achieving great empathy with works of art or something of that sort. What we found with these tryptamines was there seemed to be an unanticipated dimension, which was contact with alien intelligence. I call it this for want of a better word. Organized intellects that presented themselves in the drug trance with information that seemed to be not drawn from the personal history of the individual having the experience, or even from the collectivity of human experience. And later we came to feel that this effect was particularized to the tryptamine hallucinogens. In other words, not only DMT and ayahuasca and these more exotic Amazonian drugs, but also psilocybin, which is probably the most widely experienced of these drugs. To me, it was astonishing that a voice could address you in that state and impart information and dialogue with you. Gordon Wasson, who discovered the psilocybin mushrooms, or who formally brought them to the attention of Western science, he also wrote about this phenomenon. But for that matter, so did Plato in discussing the logos for Hellenic human beings. This experience of an interiorized guiding voice with a higher level of knowledge was not alien. However, the intellectual adventure of the last 1,000 years has made an idea like that seem preposterous, if not psychopathological. And so, as moderns, as pharmacologists exploring these drug states, my brother and I came upon this phenomenon. And in the ensuing years, we have worked with it, directed other people's attention to it, and I would say a consensus has emerged that this phenomenon is real, but no consensus has emerged, nor it may be that no consensus will ever emerge about exactly what it is. Are we dealing here with an aspect, an autonomous psychic entity, as the Jungians would style it, a sub-self that has slipped away from the control of the ego? Or are we dealing with something like a species overmind, a kind of collective intellect? Or are we in fact dealing with an alien intelligence with all that implies? It's not an easy question to answer. It's not even an easy question to grapple with, because I think the phenomenon does not manifest itself except at doses high enough that, taking now psilocybin, that the drug can be distinguished from any other drug. And that would be my personal definition of the effective dose of a drug. You should be able to tell it from any other drug.
Terence, there are certain parallels that are quite obvious, and one of them that immediately comes to mind are examples such as St. Joan hearing voices and gaining direction. Granted, she was a farm girl, and perhaps she was growing mushrooms in the backyard, but there seems to be throughout history, within the realms of religious experience, the hearing of voices, and it's always attributed to, quotes, God.
Right.
Whatever that image is for the individual that's experiencing it. And I wonder how this equates. Obviously, that experience does not, well, maybe